Welcome to Education Talks. I'm David Burke. David Higginson is one of the original founders of SchoolsBuddy, a well-established school activities platform. In this interview, I ask him about his pathway from the finance industry to establishing a successful EdTech company. David also talks about his next project, an insightful interview, particularly for anyone thinking about venturing into the EdTech industry. Well, David, welcome to Education Talks. It's great to have you here.
Nice to be here, David.
And where in the world are you joining us from?
I live in Horsham in the UK, which is about an hour south of London. So, we're lucky. We're in a nice part of the world.
Very nice part of the world. And it is great to have you on because I'm excited to talk to someone who has, I think, achieved quite a lot as in transitioning from outside of education into the EdTech industry. So you were one of the founders of SchoolsBuddy. I'm wondering if you could sort of just give us a little bit of background of your career before you started SchoolsBuddy.
Yeah, sure. I guess like a lot of people, I went to uni in the UK and came out of university without a real strong vision of exactly what it was that I wanted to do. So I ended up working then in a number of sales jobs, and ultimately ended up in financial services in the UK. So I was predominantly a mortgage broker. That's 2004 I started. And I did that for about 8 years. And then I got to a point of that where I'd sort of stopped learning, I guess, in a way. I you're always learning a bit, but I was, I'd done it for a long period of time, and something suggested, perhaps it's like the 7-year itch that people talk about, that I just kind of was like, what else is out there? So at that point, I decided to do something else with no real concrete plan, just see what else would come about. I was fortunate in the sense that I was, single, no dependent. So I didn't have that kind of worry, and the pressure of, say, a mortgage or a family to feed. So I was pretty lucky to be able to then go and do something else. So I had a year in Australia, just down the road from your neck of the woods, originally, I think. But I was down in Melbourne rather than Sydney. And I went there on a kind of pretty informal exchange program to play some club cricket over there, which was quite entertaining. When you're an Englishman playing cricket in Australia, you tend to get a fair bit of cop some abuse, as you guys might say. So that was quite fun. And I worked as a garden labourer, did some garden labouring for a really great guy over there. And during that period was just trying to figure out what was next. And slowly, while I was there, those ideas began to formulate.
So those ideas, this was the start of SchoolsBuddy. So can you tell us, how did that come about? Like, what was the inspiration and what was the original project aim?
Yeah, so like a lot of these things, the SchoolsBuddy was not originally going to be SchoolsBuddy. So one of my passions, as we've just mentioned, is cricket, and I was organising a cricket team in the UK. My friend, who became business partner, Gary Hector, was also cricket, but played a lot of golf and a lot of football or soccer. And we were frustrated effectively by the fact that at the end of a game in a changing room or in the pub, how you would go about getting the people to play next week, and the collection of money, and you'd have to give the money to the treasurer of the club and all those things. It's just it's a common process. It's a frustrating process. So this was kind of, I guess, the beginning of like apps, not like the very beginning, but early on in apps, and we thought, oh, it'd be a pretty cool idea to build an app to try and solve that problem. So that was actually, eventually we decided to call that SchoolsBuddy for various reasons. And then as we built the product, we took it to our old school. So Gary and I actually were at the same school, different. We never were at school together, but we were from the same school. And we took it to our school and said, look, what do you think? You know, do you think this would work in schools? They said yes. We spoke to a couple of other schools who said yes. We thought we'd cracked it. And then realized over a bit of time that it wasn't quite as easy as it originally had seemed. And then so we started to then focus on the school aspect rather than the club aspect, because we just realized that, you know, unless you're trying to get something to go kind of viral, and what's the kind of alchemy for that, that we would find it probably easier to kind of have an approach where you're approaching organizations, asking for meetings. So we thought that was a logical decision.
So there was yourself and Gary. Was there anyone else involved in the early development?
Yeah, we had a great, really good developer, a guy called Paul, who's a really, probably extremely key actually, because he's a great all-rounder. I knew nothing about technology. Gary was pretty knowledgeable, but neither of us are developers. So I hadn't realized, you know, when you're developing on iOS or on Android or on a PC, for example, the different skill sets that, you know, I just thought a developer was a developer. Obviously, that's far from the case. And Paul was a terrific all-rounder. So he was able to help us build across all the platforms. And he was really important, actually, which was, yeah, we were very lucky to find him.
The scope of the project, did it change? Like, and how quickly did that sort of, development process and the broadening of the scope of works change?
Yeah, it's probably an understatement, in that when we started, it was still SchoolsBuddy. When SchoolsBuddy became SchoolsBuddy, it went from an estimated 3 months to launch to about 3 years to launch. So we didn't know that, you know, there were constant iterations and changes, but it was a much lengthier process than we had definitely envisaged to begin with, without a shadow of a doubt.
So getting the ball rolling in schools then, so there's that long build up of, developing the project itself, but then getting that ball rolling in schools, that's a really crucial thing to get right. How did that go? Yeah,
it was. So going back to what I just mentioned a minute ago, so we spoke to 3 schools in the UK that we knew, that we had contacts with, and they were all interested. And we sort of stopped our market research at that point, which in some respects was a mistake, in others was probably a benefit, because I think if we'd have realized how long it would take to penetrate the market, that we might have given up, because, you know, it took a long time. And you're right, getting that traction is definitely not easy in schools. I think where we were particularly naive, I think, was the buying cycle. All of the jobs, I'd sold lots of, you know, I'd done mortgages, but I'd done holiday jobs. So I've sold vacuum cleaners, I've sold aerial photos of people's houses. All of those decisions, pretty much, that I'd been involved with before, were always a pretty, you know, more or less an immediate yes or no. So to go from that to a situation where you could see that we were onto something. We knew we were onto something early on, but to see how long that process was, and that kind of evolved before our eyes. So it's only with hindsight really that we understood it. That was a real challenge, without a shadow of a doubt.
I know what it's like to be in a school environment where people are reaching out with, you know, products or solutions. I can only imagine how difficult it is, because schools are different to businesses. They're a different type of environment, and perhaps cycles can be hard to predict, but also, people's availabilities and perhaps projects that change. That must have been I guess, a learning curve for you as well.
But I think completely. I think we didn't appreciate, and again, when you've, both of us now, I mean, you much longer than me, but when you've been in education for a period of time, it makes total sense. It's completely logical. But to realize that schools predominantly buy for the new academic year was a surprise. It probably shouldn't have been, but we didn't have an education background when we launched SchoolsBuddy. So that was a surprise. And then obviously when you're selling into schools, when you're a young company, you get, well, are you going to buy in August, September? And if you're not, okay, we're waiting for another 12 months. And that's obviously, you've got to pay yourself, or certainly put bread on the table and pay other people. So that's a big challenge. So,
the good news is that we now know SchoolsBuddy became a success. And but I just wonder, at what point did you feel that it was going to be successful?
Yeah, it was. The feedback we got throughout was always encouraging. There were very few people who said, this is a bad idea. Anyone we spoke to in education, you could see that we weren't miles off. We were sort of reasonably on point. And then when we launched, so we launched in 2015, our first clients paid us really in 2016, but we only got about 10 schools. So for the September 2016, we had about 10 schools. So that was I guess that was the point where you feel like you're validated in the sense that people are paying for your product, but we're still miles and miles away from profitability, and we had developers to pay who, they're not cheap to pay. And then in 2017, we got some traction, but we probably only had 30 or 40 schools by the following August. So that was when, I guess, the validation and the fact that we weren't completely on the wrong track was definite. But it was until 2018 really that we had a viable business, in the sense that we had enough customers to be, breaking even. So yeah, it took 2 years from launch really to get to a point where we were breaking even.
Throughout that time, did you have doubts?
Yeah, to say the least. The naivety in some ways helped, because, as I said to you, like the whole process was a sort of evolving and moving piece as you went on. So I think that helped in the fact that we always had hope, naive hope, that we'd be able to convince schools to buy kind of outside of that buying cycle. So that, in a sense, that naivety helped. But yeah, I mean, as we've talked about in the past, there was one particular moment for me where we were selling to a school in Malaysia, and we'd had 7 or 8 meetings with them. This would have been 2016, I'm pretty sure. And they were, we loved the product. It's great. Obviously, we were new, so they were really robust in making sure that we were able to deliver. And that's why we had so many meetings. But it was a really, really good process. And they were great people. And then just at the moment that they were about to place the order, which would have been March or April, I think, 2016, we were told that they'd renewed with somebody else. And I remember, for me, that was a real kind of low blow. Like, that was just because we realized how few opportunities we had because we were so new. And that was a pretty low moment.
Now, a lot of people, of course, would give up along the way. I'm sure there are instances for people where life circumstance and things can impact. But I'm wondering, like, through looking back now, what would be the biggest thing that you think you learned that will perhaps you'll use now moving forward in future ventures?
I think obviously we're all, we're all different, and this advice, I've read it many times, but it's not for everyone, of course. But for me, it was having a business partner, because Gary and I, we were friends before we started SchoolsBuddy, but we didn't know each other that well. There's a 5-year age difference between us. We got to know each other actually playing golf, particularly. But we've become, over that time, great friends. And also, effectively, we were we both got wives and families. But I think it's to share that with a business partner who knows everything about the business, and also to be able to ease that pressure on your family as well. You're not having to sulk at home or whatever, was massive. And going back to the story I was just talking about with the school in Malaysia, Gary was more on the product side, I was more on the sales side. And I think we're quite similar in a lot of respects, but there is obviously some difference between us, because the things that would really bother and upset me in the moments when I was at my lowest were less impactful on him. And then at those times, he was able to pick me up. And then on the flip side, the moments probably more product related, where things didn't quite seem to be going quite right on the product side, or certainly all the focuses that Gary had, were less impactful on me, and I was able to pick him up and keep him going. Because I think there's no doubt in my mind, certainly from my side, that without Gary's involvement, I'd have given up, because there were just times where, financial pressure, you're running out of money. In fact, both of our wives were incredibly supportive, never questioned us really, but you can't help but question yourself. You're that time of 2016 to 2017, and you've got this validation. You're like, we are onto something. We are onto something, but you haven't solved very many. So then you're thinking, are we onto something? Are we kidding ourselves? Are we mad? So that, I think for me, that was the biggest thing. And I know that I read a fair amount of sort of business, entrepreneurial type literature, and a lot of the people say about how having a business partner is so valid. And in my experience, I would definitely agree with that.
That is really good advice. Now, SchoolsBuddy is successful, profitable, things are going really well. I want you to talk a little bit about Faria and how that all came about.
Yeah, so we'd worked with Faria schools. So Faria owns Manage Back, Open Apply, and SchoolsBuddy, and some other brands as well. But when we started working with them, they were predominantly Manage Back, so running the curriculums in IB schools. And we had some recommendations from some of their customers that they were looking for an activity solution that we had. And so slowly, because we had to integrate the products, the data had to integrate from Manage Back to SchoolsBuddy. So we had to build, the relationship was an inevitable one, in the sense that we had to talk to them to understand how to get the data into SchoolsBuddy and so on. So as that happened, I guess Faria realized that we were onto something. So it's kind of like, it was a bit like a courtship, I think, sort of from 2017 through 2018. We were building up some rapport and some trust. And I think from their perspective, it became clear that there was a clear need for SchoolsBuddy in a lot of their schools. So that's when the sort of the acquisition process, I guess, began. That was sort of through 2019. But I mean, it's, and it's amazing how long things like that take. Just the whole legal process is just, you sort of, I remember going home and saying to my wife, "Oh, it looks, we've had a sort of an initial offer to buy the company, and it seems great." And 9 months later, lawyers are still talking to each other. It's a long old process.
So I guess in your view, what does it take to succeed in EdTech?
Yeah, I thought about this. Obviously, we did some preparation. We talked before the call, and I thought about this. I think you have to be persistent, obviously, because what you realize when you're selling into education, I guess it would be different for certain products, perhaps, but you're selling to people who are effectively in meetings all day, every day. I'm using the example of a meeting, but actually, obviously, it's lessons for many people. They're in a lesson. So how you get hold of those people, it's very hard. You can't pick up the phone and talk to them because they're teaching. They come out of teaching, and people like me sending them hundreds of emails. So they've got hundreds of emails in their inbox. So the amount of communication from my side or from the sales side that you're sending to schools is enormous for what feels like a relatively low response rate. But I don't think, and I think that's an easy point for someone to give up, because you think, well, they're not interested, they're not responding. And in my previous life, in mortgages, for example, I definitely would have given up. Do you want to buy a house? Yes or no? Am I the mortgage broker for you? Yes or no? Okay. If I haven't heard from you for 3 months, if I'm still emailing you 3 months later, you'd think I was mad. I've already moved in. Why are you still emailing me? Whereas with education, you need to be able to be, I would say, persistent on that side. And I think that also then kind of pairs up with, you need to be able to budget pretty carefully, because and I know this is true of other, organizations, not just SchoolsBuddy. Your predominant income is coming in, around the summer, July, August, September, people are renewing. So that money, you need to not run out of money before it, and you need to then spend that money wisely, because you're not likely then to get a load of money in the interim period. You will get some sales, but very, very few and far between. I mean, I'm guessing off the top of my head, but I reckon 80 to 85% of revenue comes in those months. So you've really got to be able to budget carefully.
Thinking of people who've got their own idea or project that they think could be the next big thing, what would be the single piece of advice that you would give them?
Yeah, I mean, so when I left university, I didn't consider myself to be entrepreneurial in any way, really. My career has happened, as lots of careers, I guess, happen sort of by accident, hopefully with some reasonable decisions along the way. But there's a lot of things that happened sort of, by accident. And through that journey, I've been involved with a few different startup ideas. So in the mortgage world, we tried a few different other startups to sit alongside that for additional revenue. And I think you need to know, it's like a horrible thing to say, and some people, listening to this will in a way not thank you, but you do need to know when to give up. And that was kind of the challenge with SchoolsBuddy. So in a couple of the other sort of sideline projects I'd done when I was particularly in financial services, so for example, we started an estate agency. And I guess it's kind of instinct. You just sort of knew it wasn't quite happening. We weren't quite, it just wasn't quite there for whatever reason. And we knew that it was the right decision to say, look, we're not the experts in this. We're going to park that. We're going to give up. And I think with SchoolsBuddy, because Gary and I, when we were in sort of sound mind, if you like, when we were fairly level and calm, we never questioned it. Like we questioned it at those sort of high and low moments, but in a sort of sound frame of mind after a good night's sleep, we'd be like, no, we are onto something. Like we really believe in it. So having that ability, I guess, and you could argue it's luck, but having that ability to go, well, hang on, this isn't working, and this isn't working yet, but we're really on to something. I think that's that ability to try and separate those two things, because it's so easy to be passionate, right? And you think my idea is so good and it solves my problem, and that's great. But does it solve enough of other people's problems? And if it does, can you monetize it? Because, that's also the challenge. When you realize you're onto something, how quickly is it going to bring enough revenue to put bread on the table effectively for you and or the other people that you're employing? And I think that's just the reality of, running your own business.
So it's all about there's belief. It's harnessing that belief and working it within the realms of, I guess, your current situation and what people are saying to you, and refining perhaps that belief. Is that perhaps a good summary here?
Yeah, definitely. And trying to understand whether your belief is marketable to a big enough audience.
Yeah. Very good. Now, David, I want to look ahead. Let's look ahead, and I want to ask you about what's next. Are you staying in EdTech?
Yeah, so I finished with Farrier nearly a year ago now, and to be honest, I didn't envisage sticking around in EdTech, not because I didn't enjoy it and have some great experiences, because I worked with people like yourself, and there's other people in your shoes that I'm still I would like to think pretty friendly with, but I felt like my knowledge was so sort of niche that I wasn't sure that it would kind of translate into another idea. I suppose just on that, I realized at Farrier, one of the things about leaving was that I realized that I'm just more passionate as a founder. Really, that's just kind of what gets me out of bed in the morning. So I didn't, whilst there were obviously other jobs in EdTech that I could go to, I wanted to found something in EdTech. So I had some time out with the family, and eventually, along with Gary, we were lucky enough to meet a couple of guys who had what we think is a pretty good idea, and we're just doing something right now.
Is there anything you'd like to share about that idea?
Yeah, so we're looking at the world of esports and international schools. With SchoolsBuddy, we worked with athletic activities and sort of tech directors, and we, having made some nice contacts there, we came across. So Gary was actually approached by the two lads, Elliot and Eunice, fresh out of college, really passionate, really smart guys, and really passionate about esports. And it's actually quite a nice story. They never went to school together. They're international school students who met gaming, met online gaming. And they got in touch with Gary because they had come across SchoolsBuddy as they were trying to get their idea off the ground. And we started to speak to them. And then, we realized through talking to friendly contacts at schools that actually the world of esports is coming. International schools are aware of it and looking for ways to kind of embed that in their athletic and their after school programs. So that's what we're doing.
It sounds like a really great opportunity to sort of partner up with two people with, I guess, providing a balance to your experience and skill set. It does sound interesting, and also from the product point of view, it's certainly something in schools which I know from experience that schools are very much aware of. If there are schools that already participate in a lot of esports events and activities, but a lot of schools are also just trying to figure out how to go about that. So I wish you good luck with that. Now, how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn, obviously, so people are welcome to get in touch with me there. But if they'd like to email me, it's david.higginson so the company is called Digon. So it's david.higginson@digon.gg. Digon is DAIGON. The website is digonesports.com. So what we'd like to do, David, actually, because it's we've talked over a number of years, and it's great to be involved with your new venture and your new
Small
platform.
venture, yeah.
So we'd like to kind of do a little giveaway, basically. So anybody who's at an international school who books a meeting with us, we'll give 3 gaming controllers away to them. No obligation to buy anything. We'd just like to sit down, learn a bit about what they're interested in, tell them a bit about what we're up to, and we'll give 3 gaming controllers away to their school just to help them kind of launch esports at their school. So, and we'll do that kind of up to the end of May, I think, this year. If that sounds good to you.
That sounds fantastic. That is great. What do they have to do? Just mention this wonderful show, Education Talks?
That's exactly right. So so if they book a meeting via the contact form, mention your name or mention Education Talks, then we'll send those 3 controllers. Absolutely.
Well, that's fantastic. Now, I really hope you don't end up with 3 controllers collecting dust in the corner. I really hope that someone and amongst the big audience out there takes that opportunity. That's fantastic. Look, David, it's been really great to catch up. Great to have this chat. I've certainly been, I'll be taking notes later on. Great to have a chat and learn about your story, and wish you all the best for the future. Hope to see you again here on Education Talks.
Thanks, David. It's been a pleasure.
Education Talks is an EdEvents production for the EdEvents community. You can keep up to date with the development of the community by registering on the website at ed.events.